Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith and I'm really excited today to be diving into a Kickstarter preview series for Etherfields from Awaken Realms. Now this particular game will be landing on Kickstarter for July 16th, so there's not much of a wait that's going to be happening before you're able to actually take a look at more information for this particular game. The one thing I do want to make mention of is that I am being compensated for my time with this game. The next thing I want to mention is that this video is the first of a handful of videos that are going to come to show you not only how to set up Etherfields, but also how the game plays and flows. The purpose of this video or Kickstarter preview series is going to be to help you make an informed decision as to whether or not this is a game that works for you. So without further ado, how about we head to the table and actually set up Etherfields. Two other important mentions I want to make before we actually dive right into the setup is, first off, this is a Kickstarter prototype, so everything you're seeing here is in prototype form and is subject to change. And the final thing to make note of, guys, is in regards to spoilers. That's right, everyone's favorite topic of discussion, especially when you're talking about board games coming in the future. And I always try my best to avoid spoilers, but in this particular case with Etherfields, the creators have full-on admitted there is no way to do gameplay videos or playthrough videos without spoilers being involved in Etherfields, as Etherfields unveils itself, unlocks itself, and really intertwines its decks as you discover the game on your own. The fun part with that is during a playthrough or gameplay video, you're going to see things that are potentially going to fall into that spoiler territory zone. Now, another important thing to note within that spoiler conversation is the fact that the creators of the game have developed this prototype to land us in chapter number 3, which is very unique because typically you'd start at the very beginning of the game in chapter 1 and see very little of the game and kind of wonder what could potentially it become over time. But what's happening here with this Etherfields prototype is that this one starts with chapter number 3. So a lot has already happened, but the even more fun part is I, and neither you, understand what those first 2 chapters involve, meaning we're going into this kind of blind. So in a way, yes, there will be spoilers for chapter 3 in terms of what's happening, but context is going to be a little bit lost on us. We might start putting together some pieces in chapter number 3 together, and that's where the prototype essentially stops, is just within chapter 3. So a number of the decks that are on the actual game board are going to be matured to a state of chapter 3, meaning they're going to be further advanced than what you'd expect if you started the game from scratch. That includes the world map. It's not going to be as open as it would be if you were beginning the game from the beginning. You may only have 1 tile worth. In this prototype, you're going to have potentially 8 open tiles of the world already at your fingertips as we move through this playthrough. So you're going to see quite a bit. But I did want to make that perfectly clear off the hop. There is absolutely no way for me to avoid spoilers and also show you guys how this game plays. The first step of the prototype setup is to go ahead and shuffle the random encounter tile deck and place it in the random encounter tile space. Next, we're going to shuffle and place the advantages deck. The advantages deck is going to be called upon by some of the random encounters at times, and it's going to give an advantage to something occurring during the random encounter. Then place the turn order deck on the blue space of the game board after shuffling it, and this particular blue turn deck is going to not only count the turns, but also be used in order to additionally set behavior for the encountered entity in a given turn. The fate deck is going to sit on the question mark space of the game board. Shuffle this deck and place it like so. This fate deck is going to be used when you do random adventures when you travel on the world map. Next, you're going to place the secret Tiles deck, and this deck is going to comprise itself of a number of tiles of which there'll be a numerical value on. Now, don't be concerned if you happen to see one that says random encounter on its back. It doesn't belong in the random encounter spot which we filled earlier. This is a specific card that'll be called upon during our adventures within Etherfields based on that numerical value. So this essentially is a secrets Tiles deck, which will be called build upon throughout our adventures. Make sure that the entirety of this deck is all going from the lowest number on top to the highest number on the very bottom. One very important note with regards to the secret tiles is absolutely do not look at the backs of these tiles, as you will absolutely be spoiling certain events and game triggers within the story if you do. Similar to the Secret Tiles deck, we're now going to place the Secrets Card deck. This is a smaller pile of cards, more average-sized cards, and this is also going to be staged the same way. Again, lowest cards on top, highest cards on the bottom, and you also do not want to flip these over. Also, don't be concerned if the backs of the cards are different or match any other decks of cards that will be placed during setup. Secret tiles and cards are all kinds of secret effects, adventures, details to which specific cards or locations are going to refer. So these cards will be referenced throughout the gameplay quite a bit and to reveal new and very important information about the world as you move along. Next, we have what's called the intro tiles. In the prototype, this is going to be inside an envelope that says intro tiles, and inside of this envelope are 3 different spots to begin adventures within chapter number 3. Each one of these is going to introduce you to the open scene that you are entering. So for this particular upcoming playthrough, we are going to start it off with Somewhere on the Road. Those intro tiles can then be placed in their own space on the game board. The next deck to place is the action deck, and it's going to be an action pool. It's all of the action cards that you have that do not have a numerical value on the back of the card around this action title right here. You'll be able to purchase cards from this particular pile or pool in order to build out your decks. This next deck, just like the action deck, will be shuffled thoroughly and placed as the items deck in this particular case, and this deck is going to be a pool of items that can be purchased or used within your team. This next deck is called the Suffering deck. It will be placed like so after shuffled, and this is going to comprise itself of negative effects as well as penalties which will enter your character's decks, basically making things more difficult for you in your journeys within Etherfields. You'll also see in the center of the game board, at least in the prototype version, rows A, B, and C, 1 through 4, all in this grid pattern here, and these tiles you'll be using throughout the game are going to tell you where they should be placed when you're moving through the world, scenes, random encounters, and all of that kind of stuff. So you're going to want to have your world map assembled, and in this particular prototype, remember we're in chapter number 3, so the world map is quite developed at this point and comes in this 9 card holder sleeve that, again, if you had them outside of this sleeve, each in the top left hand corner actually denotes what particular quadrant below it should be sitting in. So essentially it should be sitting like this. Makes it really easy to move around. I don't know if this will be part of the Kickstarter to keep things organized easily or not, but at least in the prototype, it makes things really easy. There's also an awakening space in the middle of this world map. Tons of different spaces to take a look at. Again, won't make a lot of sense right now until we actually get into the playthrough, but typically the awakening space is where you would start unless the game actually specifies that you begin or land elsewhere. Now in this playthrough, we're actually not starting technically in the world map, although we are here in one of these locations somewhere. We don't know exactly how we got there, being that we're landing there in chapter number 3, but we will actually be building out a scene, and that's where we're going to be in when we start this Somewhere on the Road prologue. But first, we also have to ensure that we have our random encounters map set up, and this is going to be a map that looks like this, which will occur when we happen to do random encounters. So you'll be interchanging a number of different levels and scenes, encounters, world map views. We also have some other game components to set up, which I placed on the right-hand side of the board. We'll start with the Turn 2 marker, essentially a marker used to help us remember to flip or invert certain cards in play on our second turn. You'll see that when we actually start using it during gameplay. We also have what's called power tokens, and there are 3 in each of these stacks of 3. You've got 3 green contact, 3 yellow false, and 3 red wrath tokens. These are bonus resources that are going to be used in addition to the cards you're playing out of your deck to basically use as a resource to accumulate more actions or do more on your turn. They're very, very powerful, hence the term power tokens. And then above that, you've got these red wooden cubes, which are used to denote injuries. There's 6 of them, and you're going to mark the number of injuries you've received by the entity with these particular cubes. Next up on the right-hand side, we have the words wooden cubes. There are 6 of these, and you're used to mark the number of words received by the entity, because you can actually speak to the entities within the game. Above that, you have a blue wooden cube, which is the current entity's action marker. So you'll see how that's denoted later, but essentially it will denote what that particular entity is going to do on its turn based on the turn counter card. And above that, we've got keys, a very, very important aspect of Etherfields. And these keys, there's 4 of them, and they're earned for completing the open scenes required to open closed final scenes, which may sound confusing, but it's actually quite easy once you see it in action. On the left-hand side of the game board, we have some dice here. This die right here in the top right-hand corner is considered the Fate die. We'll learn more about it during gameplay. We also have the entity's action die here, which in a regular game will reduce the number of dice to 1 universal die, but in this prototype may be used in a different form. In this particular die here is the entity movement die, so it's going to determine where the entity is moving. And then finally we have the luck die. Just above it here we have 6 tokens that are in kind of a white color, and they are the ether, which makes up Etherfields, the name itself. There's 6 of them, and they're used to mark the acquired ether corresponding to the experience that you've gained, for which you can then develop your character, buy new action cards, all kinds of different things within the game. So ether is definitely a key to success. The last 2 components that I have set up on the left-hand side of the board is these universal markers, of which there are 10 of them, and they're of course universal. They're used for various effects to mark blocked actions and locations. Some actions in locations are one-time use, for instance, or they're simply just used to denote a particular entity's involvement in a current situation or scenario and how long. It could be a timed event. Anything along those lines, universal markers are used. Just above here we have the pain markers, of which there are 16 of them. They're used to mark wounds, fatigue, fear on your characters. The next major step of setup is to choose your character. Now, each of these characters has an archetype behind them. The one on the left is the lucker, the one in the middle is the specialist, and the one on the far right is the tough guy. So in the prototype here, we have 3 different archetypes you can choose from, and the color bases on those miniatures will match not only the player board, which you'll collect after you've chosen your character, but also the starting deck worth of action cards that you're going to have related to your particular archetype, which is going to begin to flourish as you deck build your way through this adventure. It is possible to control multiple characters at the same time if you'd like to do that in a solo capacity. In other words, playing multi-handed or controlling multiple characters. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to show you how the game scales to allow for a true solo playthrough. Out of the 3 options here in front of you, I'm going to go ahead and choose the specialist right in the middle. So we are going to go ahead and grab the player board, which matches this archetype's color, as well as the specialist deck. Next, we're going to grab the player board that corresponds to the color of our character or archetype. In this case, it's green, so we don't need these other 2 player boards at all. We're going to remove them from play. Next, we're going to be focusing on finding the help card as well as the action deck for our character, which is specific to the specialist, which will be shuffled and placed in the chest spot here. One other thing to note regarding archetypes within this game is the prototype has 3. There may be more just in the core experience when the Kickstarter lands. There could also be more when the Kickstarter continues forward through stretch goals. That is yet to be seen. We'll go ahead now and place the help card in the help card location right here. You'll notice that they're exactly the same, at least in this prototype, but on the opposite side of the reference card, there's actually information regarding how ether works and how it's used within the game as well. all helpful information to keep handy on your player board. One thing to make mention of, these player boards have already changed in terms of the look and feel of them. You can find information as development continues on the Etherfields Facebook group. It's actually a really great group to go check out if you're looking to see how development is changing at all times. So this player board looks even more dynamic and interesting looking than it does in this prototype. On top of that, we're going to want to find the specific archetype deck, the specialist deck, which is going to be placed in the chest location in the center of the player board, shuffled up, of course, and you shouldn't know what order those cards are in. To the right of the deck, we have the action area for discard. So every time we use cards and we're discarding them, they're going to be placed right here. We also have these slots along the bottom for 5 active cards. This is a big part of the gameplay. We'll talk more about it when we actually see it in action in the upcoming playthrough. The final step for setting up the archetype deck that you have chosen is to go ahead to the action pool deck, which is this one right here, which is a store of cards, which essentially will be used for deck building purposes throughout the gameplay. Because we're dropping ourselves into chapter number 3, the prototype rules, and I believe only the prototype rules, allow me to go ahead and draw 3 cards from the top of the deck at the beginning of the game. We get to choose one of those 3 cards for free and add them into our archetypes deck from the beginning. Again, likely because if we were and happen to be into chapter number 3, we may have gained a number of cards already. So this is simulating that action. Now the cool thing is I could go ahead here and choose this card on my own, but I'm going to actually throw that back to you guys. As we pull these 3 cards off of the deck, you won't know too much about how they're actually used in the game, and even for myself, I've left most of this to be discovered as I play it. So I'm going to let you guys decide actually which of the 3 cards we should add into the deck. So we're going to go ahead and draw these 3 right now. So the very top card of the deck is Particular State of Acceleration. So this is your first option to go into the specialist deck. The second option to go into the specialist deck is Searcher. And finally, the third option to go into the deck is Matrix. So of those 3 cards, I want you to let me know in the comments below which of those 3 cards would you like to see added into the specialist deck. Now the one thing to make very, very clear is we know the 3 different power tokens you can see off the sides here, and in those particular 3 cards we saw one of each of those different colors there too. But my specialist actually focuses on majorly, or in most cases, the green or contact token or specialist power. So the question really becomes, should we be going after a card like Search, which would work well with what we can do with the Specialist, or should we be using something like the Matrix, which can deal damage, or should we be focusing on something that could potentially help us move around faster? That's a decision I'm going to leave to you guys in the comments below. The next step of character creation is a very interesting one and has you choosing amongst a number of masks, at least in this prototype version of the game. One disclaimer I will make is that this number of masks when you first create a character will definitely not be available to you, as you discover these masks throughout your playthrough as you move along in Etherfields. Now don't worry, these masks are not spoiling anything, as the actual text that is interesting to note is on the back side of these masks. Each of these masks has a front face, of course, being that it's a mask, and on the back side has an ability or something that's going to change or dramatically alter your character, allowing it to do or use different things in different ways than other characters can. So essentially, the prototype rules allow you to choose 2 of the masks from this set here, going around the table for each character that's involved. And because we're playing solo, we have to choose just 2 of the masks that interest us based on either the word alone, the art alone, or just how the mask looks. And then from there, we're able to flip them over and we can decide which of the 2 masks we want to take based on the ability or the special on the back of that mask. Once we've chosen chosen the mask we want, we're going to slip it into a standee like this in the prototype version, and it's actually going to sit face up and down vertical in front of us to represent that we're wearing that particular mask in the playthrough. So now I'm going to throw the decision to start with back to you guys to let me know in the comments below which two masks should we basically go with moving forward. The rest will disappear to the sidelines, and from that we'll be able to reveal those two masks, and I will choose based on the abilities or specials on the back of them which one I'm going to don for the specialist. So let's go through each of the mask names right now so it can help you in your decision of picking the two that are your favorites. So we have Fear, we have Haste, Compassion, Wisdom, Hate, False, Gritty, Dark, Pain, Luck, and Ghost. So those are your options. Write the two that are your most favorite down in the comments below. I'll tally up all of those votes and we'll grab those two masks and move on from there in the next video. The next step of setup is going to be grabbing 5 specifically written cards out from the items deck that the prototype rules mention, again to get us in sync with chapter number 3. These 5 item cards that we gain are going to be going into our team's storage area, but first we get to select 3 of those 5 specific cards to actually slot into the item slots on the far left hand side of this Etherfields board. And I'm going to go ahead and grab those 5 cards right now so that you can see them up close. So here are the 5 cards specifically mentioned in the prototype rules, and we need to select 3 of them. So I'm going to throw it back to you guys to take a look at these 5 cards in front of you and make a decision on which 3 you believe should be slotted into the item slots in the upper left-hand corner of the Etherfields game board. Whichever ones we don't choose, we don't lose them. They actually go into storage, which is basically an area that our entire team keeps stored cards. We don't lose those, but the 3 that we choose, we are actively bringing those particular items into this playthrough. So we have the journal right here, the blue car, which is considered a vehicle, a flashlight, a strategic plan, and little helpers. Now these cards again can be used by the entire team, but because I'm playing solo, my one character can be greedy and use all of them. Now on top of that, each of these item cards can be used in 2 different ways. They can be used as a resource for actions that you'd like to do, or they can be used for their actual ability or action listed on the card itself. If you use it as a resource when it's sitting in the items slot as an active card, this card is considered discarded. Any cards that are discarded in Etherfields are actually discarded to the storage slot, which is an area on the Etherfields board in the upper left-hand corner for where your team keeps stored cards. Anywhere you see the term removed, the card is actually removed and goes back to the deck that it came from. So if an item card mentions that it's removed, we actually lose the item. If it's discarded, even though it sounds like we lose it, it really goes to our storage. That is a key thing to note across these cards. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the other 2 cards on the opposite side, and hopefully you guys will be able to make a better decision on which of these 3 cards you think should be slotted in. And on the right hand side we have strategic plan and little helpers. Hopefully you guys can see the abilities and actions on the bottom of the card much clearer now, as well as the resources on these cards to help make an informed decision. Now another thing I want to make note of for individuals that are unfamiliar with what these icons represent, typically when you see the yellow icons, which are the false icons, they are used for movement. If you happen to see the red icons, they are used for wrath, and that is used for attacking. And if you see the green icons, which are these hand icons right here, they're considered contact and they're used for communication. So based on your guys' feedback in the comments below, we're going to know 3 active item cards to slot into these 3 spaces right here going into the next video, and then the 2 that we don't choose, we're going to discard them up into the storage area for our team. So as a quick refresher, if we happen to have the journal for instance, in the active item slot, and during the playthrough we use it for its bottom action, this card is discarded and put into storage. We lose it from our active items row. If we happen to have an item like the blue car, which is active in this item row, and we get another vehicle, we have to choose which vehicle we want. The other is then discarded and put into storage. The reason for this is because you can only have one vehicle active for your team at all times. And of course, there are ways to obtain more items as we move through the game. Mainly, we're going to find them in scenes, but we will see how that unravels itself as we go through the playthrough. And last but certainly not least is the miniatures that are included within Etherfields to further immerse you in the world itself when these creatures or entities appear inside of this game. Now, there are large ones and small ones. These are some of the bigger ones that came inside of the prototype. You can see the detail on them is phenomenal, looks absolutely stunning, and there's also some really small ones as well that we'll take a quick look at. Again, the miniature number is limited in the prototype version. There will be more of those options available during the Kickstarter. Here is a look at more of a medium-sized miniature within the game, still quite large when compared to a hero miniature, quite large in scale still, but there are some small enemy or entity miniatures also included in this prototype, which will then find themselves in the final product as well. And here's an example of some of those more smaller miniatures that match the same size as the hero miniatures that come in the game in terms of scale. And that is going to conclude the setup video for Etherfields from Awaken Realms. So join me in the next episode as we dive into the very first part of gameplay and we journey into the unknown together. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.